Water, Katara rasped as Momo stared at her with large, green, uncomprehending eyes. The lemur held up another, distinctly non-water offering, and the girl shook her head with a cough. No, water. Water, she enunciated, and the critter chirped at her before darting away once more to grab some other type of useless junk. Wait, Momo, don't! Zuko cursed as he stalked across the campsite, full water skins and a cooking pot in hand. He groaned. Katara, stop sending the lemur out for things. I literally left 5 seconds ago to go to the stream. The girl blinked at him, delirious, repeating, water, as though she hadn't realized that she was not still talking to the lemur. Zuko sighed heavily and shoved the water skin into her hand. Yeah, water. He then made his way over to Sokka, who was yelling about how dare they treat royalty like this, and he was king of all the earthbenders and demanded to be shown respect. Zuko just rolled his eyes and forced a new water skin into his hands as well. At least the boy wasn't so far gone that he didn't recognize that. Instead, he upended the skin, practically dumping it on himself in the haste to drink. Zuko groaned and refilled the water skin with one of the extras and dunked a few pieces of cloth in the cook pot before laying strips across the water teens' foreheads. He sighed heavily as he finally settled down, slipping into a light doze. Aang should have been the one doing this, not him. But no! Zuko spoke aloud to himself. A nasty habit that he picked up in the cave, when some days that was his only chance to hear a human voice, which has honestly been referred to the days when the Freedom Fighters actually talked to him. He managed to mostly hold back during his travels so far, but with Aang gone and the other two incapacitated, he didn't see much reason to hide his frustration behind pursed lips. Aang just had to go to the apothecary. The teen's voice went high, mocking for a moment. Oh, Zuko, I can't go much faster because I'm an airbender. It can fly around. We need to get the medicine right away. Blah, 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 blah. Watch me twirl around on my stupid ball of air. Aang, is that you? Katara rasped drowsily, but Zuko ignored her. He resumed his normal speaking voice. Well, how did that work out for you, Aang? 'Cause that was hours ago! He shouted to the sky. He collapsed to the ground with an indignantly dramatic huff, and tried to ignore the fact that he was only so angry because he was worried. Aang should have been back forever ago, and the apothecary was literally close enough to be seen. Even if he had to get ingredients for the medicine, it shouldn't have lasted past the time the sun set. Something was wrong. Something was very, very wrong. But Aang was the Avatar. What could obviously be a threat to him? Aang was horrendously untrained and naive to the ways of the world, but wasn't a threat to him. He glanced uncertainly to his companions. They were adamant that the Fire Nation was after them. He knew that Father would want to stop the Avatar, especially one so clearly aligned against the Fire Nation. But in the weeks or so that he had been traveling with them, he hadn't actually seen any evidence of that. He half thought that they were more biased and paranoid than actually in danger. They weren't exactly lying low. If the Fire Nation was actually after them, they would have been seeing them before, right? He should have told them about the Stronghold. He'd forgotten, okay? I haven't had geography class in years, he argued in the empty night sky. And Sokka hoards the maps. I didn't know we were this close. Why does Sokka's maps have anything important on it? He knew why. It was an old map. Not from before the war, but not much later than that. And it focused more on trading routes, hunting grounds, and good fishing spots rather than towns and buildings. The Pohuai Stronghold was one of the first Fire Nation territories built in the Earth Kingdom, but it still wasn't old enough. It also wasn't big, and that was by design. If the Earth Kingdom didn't realize its significance, the Yu Yan archers could practice in peace before being sent to wreak destruction on the battlefield. Regardless, it hadn't even been mentioned on the map. If Zuko hadn't finally recognized the shape of the Apothecary University, none of them would have had any idea. It wasn't his fault. Was it his responsibility? Zuko groaned and dramatically kicked at the sky. This would be a turning point, wouldn't it? This wasn't a few treacherous thoughts whispered to himself in a cave. It wasn't a burning resentment for the man who led his nation, who led his family. It wasn't helping a collection of refugees that the Fire Nation probably didn't even actually really care about. It wasn't blabbering potential state secrets about the inner workings of the Fire Court to a peasant on a sinking ship. It wasn't even tagging along with the Avatar, an enemy of the state. If he actually did something now, it would actually be treason. He would actually deserve the sentence he had been given to him. He would deserve his banishment. Be a criminal. Was he willing to do that? For some kid he barely knew? He didn't want to be enemy of the Fire Nation. He loved his people, their passion and drive. They were his by right of birth. They always had been, even back when he thought he had no chance of being Fire Lord. He wanted to protect them. He had always wanted that. That was why he was in this mess in the first place. Unease stirred within him. It was hard, nearly impossible to protect his people in a war such as this, when it was an entire world against them. The purpose of this war was good. The Fire Nation was truly the most advanced among the nations. It was good of them to spread their culture and technology. But was it worth all this? He thought of the refugees fleeing their homes, with all their belongings strapped to their back. He thought of the tremor of Katara's voice as she spoke about her mother and her struggles to work her bending without a master, to so much as offer advice. He thought of how Sokka told him about the men leaving to protect his village when he had been barely trained. He thought of how sometimes Aang would go quiet, petting Momo or Appa with eyes a million miles and 100 years away. He even thought about Jet, living in the trees to protect dozens of orphans whose parents his people had killed. He knew the answer. Nothing was worth this. Even if his people had won, there would be no peace. The other nations would not actually benefit from their advancements in technology, their culture. They would be cowed and afraid and hateful of the new ways of life simply because they came from their oppressors. This war would not share the Fire Nation's greatness, only destroy it. Could he betray his nation in order to save his people? Zuko cursed, punching at the ground and accidentally hitting one of Momo's offerings and sending it flying with a clatter. He looked up to find it, and froze when he saw the mask by the light of the moon. The Blue Spirit, one of his mother's favorite characters. Suddenly a flare of fire from the direction of the stronghold tore his attention away from his thoughts. He eyed the torches, and knew with a sinking feeling in his stomach that they were a sign of triumph, of victory. It was a display put on to celebrate something amazing. Something like capturing the Avatar. Like capturing him, keeping him trapped and scared away from the sun in a dark hole somewhere. Without thinking, Zuko pulled the mask over his face and grabbed his dual dao. His earlier musings and doubts were fled his mind completely, overtaken by one clear thought. He would not let Aang go through what he did. No one would be held captive on his watch. Not again. And if it was the Blue Spirit committing treason and not him, maybe he could convince himself he was still loyal. Zuko sincerely hoped the Fire Nation's most secure stronghold was hard to sneak in on a normal day, because if not, he had no clue how they had not lost this war decades ago. It was the speech, right? Everyone was listening to whatever general or official had orchestrated the capture of the Avatar, and that was why it had been so simple to sneak in. Right? He really hoped so. Honestly, he shouldn't be complaining. He wanted to get in without detection. And he had. He had just expected it to be much more difficult. But with a single rope, he managed to safely scale the walls, and now he was in the ventilation system. And other than the distant roar of his speech being made, he hadn't seen a single person. If he actually thought anyone expected him to sneak in like this, he would have thought it was a trap. However, as it was, he doubted anyone in the Fire Nation knew he was alive, much less helping the Avatar. He made his way through the fort, uncertain at first where to go until he found some guards at the entrance of a hallway. Considering they were the only guards he'd seen, it was pretty reasonable to guess that they were protecting something important. Someone important. Zuko took a deep, calming breath, almost like one of his meditation exercises. These men would be firebenders, and he wasn't anymore. He only had his swords. He had training, though, and hours upon hours of practice. He could do this. The team maneuvered himself above their heads, and, with a single steady breath, he silenced the part of him that was screaming at the thought of attacking Fire Nation citizens who were just doing their jobs. Then he dropped. As always, he was grateful to have studied dual blades. He dropped in the middle of the two men, one sword at each hand, and managed to hit both men simultaneously on the back of their heads, sending them to the ground with gentle thumps. His heart pounding, his breath racing, the teen looked at the two unconscious guards. It was too late now for second-guessing. He found a closet a few yards away and began the arduous task of dragging the heavy men inside, hoping that no guard would be less suspicious than unconscious ones. He didn't expect them to wake, but gagged and tied them up regardless before looking around the supply closet. Supplies. The teen grabbed a length of chain and a bucket of mop water, just in case, before rooting in the men's pockets. Most firebenders wouldn't be caught dead with a secondary weapon, and it was considered a sign that your bending was too weak to be relied upon. Luckily, the Fire Nation Stronghold was one of the few exceptions. One did not become one of the most secure forts in the world by sacrificing practicality for pride. They didn't have swords, but the men had throwing knives tucked in their belts, and Zuko took those as well. Looking around the closet, he didn't find much else that was useful, but remembering a scene from a play that used a similar trick, he grabbed one of the helmets before he shut the door. The teen tiptoed through the guarded hall. Whenever he came to an intersecting hall or turn, he lay on his stomach and stuck the blade of the knife out far enough that the shiny metal reflected the hall. Finding no one, he continued on until finally the flat of the blade showed 4 men standing guard at a door. Nodding to himself in satisfaction, Zuko prepped the trap. He hid a bucket of water behind a decorative pedestal and identified a pipe in the wall strong enough to support the weight of several people. Then, with a nod to himself, a scowl behind his mask, the teen gently rolled the stolen helmet into the hall. He held his breath, hoping against hope that Act 4, Scene 4, the Spirit's Bowl was accurate. He had to fight not to cheer as soft footsteps came his way. Finally, his knowledge of Fire Nation theater was coming in handy. He crouched behind another pedestal and waited, listening to the soft footsteps growing closer as the guard neared. Finally, he turned into the hall. Zuko immediately jumped up, dodging to the side to evade a flash of flame, winding the man with a punch to the stomach, and knocking him unconscious with another hit of the sword held when he folded over. Working quickly, Zuko chained the man up so he was hanging by his arms down the pipe. But by then he had heard a pair of footsteps coming his way. They were no longer risking coming one by one. He scrambled up the wall to sit crouched in the crook of the ceiling, chains in hand. These men were much more prepared than the former guard, rushing the hall at a team, firebending stances at the ready. They were shocked, however, by their dangling companion and dropped their ready poses. Holding himself to the wall by 3 limbs, he used the other to wrap the chain around one man's hand, then pulled and dropped, sending the man careening into his friend, then crashing into the ceiling. The move had knocked both men unconscious as well. 3 down, 1 to go. Zuko grabbed the bucket and started into the hallway, deciding that the risk was worth going on the offense. It was good that he had, for the man had grabbed a warning horn and was prepared to give a warning of the danger. Zuko pulled one of the throwing knives out of his pocket and sunk into the horn, with the man dropping with a cry of horror. He was much better than the others, though, and quickly worked past his shock and moved into a stance that sent fire flashing at Zuko. The masked teen flung water from the bucket, dousing the flames. He was upon the other firebender before the man could counter, then spun in a move designed to break someone's root. Traditionally, this would have been performed with a blast of fire, but the bucket would work well enough. The man lay flat on his back, and unable to get his root back, he could not fight with fire as Zuko knocked him out as well. Zuko breathed deeply as he eyed the fallen man. If anyone was on the other side of this room besides Aang, he had lost any hope of element of surprise. He could only hope that the fact there was no alarm having raised meant he was alone. The banished prince slipped into the room, swords raised, and Kata started to intimidate any enemies left in the room. Aang started screaming. Zuko hadn't thought this through. "Shut up!" he hissed, then finally took in the scene in front of him. Aang was chained to the wall far more securely than Zuko had ever been. His limbs were stretched out, preventing him an inch of freedom to be used to bend. Zuko felt his heart beat erratically, eyes locked on the bits of metal digging into the younger boy's wrist. Trapped, unable to bend, surrounded by enemies, away from the sun. It was too much. Too familiar. Zuko gripped his swords, wanting nothing more than to have an enemy to fight, something to defeat. The torches once struck in the walls were mostly burned out and the room was too dim. It was too familiar. Aang kept babbling, kept screaming a grating noise. It was enough to break him from the fear pounding in his heart. It was unfamiliar. I said shut up! Do you want to get caught? Zuko asked harshly, parched lips making his voice even raspier than normal. He yanked his mask half off to reveal enough of his face to set Aang at ease. The boy immediately brightened. Shut up, don't say my name, he commanded, finally finding enough control of himself to stalk toward Aang. His heart was pounding again as he neared the chains, but with swords in his hand and facing someone else. He was able to do for Aang what he had never had the tools or the angle to do for himself, and smashed the chains, freeing the Avatar. Now let's go. We don't have much time before someone realizes something's wrong. Got it. Wait, my frogs! Sokka and Katara need to suck on those to get better. That sounds fake. That's what the healers said would work. Zuko growled. We can get new frogs, Aang. We need to go. Zuko grabbed the back of the boy's cloak and tugged him along like a cobra cat carries her cobra kits, dragging him past the bound and gagged guards who were slowly starting to awaken. Whoa, Aang breathed as he saw the guards. Zuko said nothing. What was there to say? He had betrayed his men, his people, for Aang. He didn't want to talk about it. The speech must have ended at some point, as guards were now starting to patrol. Aang and Zuko had to move silently along through the ventilation/sewer system. Zuko was grateful for the mask that hid his identity. Even if he was spotted, at least there would be a few moments before anyone knew what the former princess stooped to. He watched for a break in the guards and nodded Aang through, saying nothing as he pointed to the rope which had miraculously not been spotted. They started climbing, and Zuko allowed a single, hesitantly hopeful thought that they had actually done it. That was, of course, the moment everything went wrong. Alarm bells sounded when they were halfway up the floor, and a guard quickly spotted them and commanded the rope be cut. Zuko soon found himself plummeting through the ground that was too far away, and created a cushion of air that saved them from a ghastly fate of broken limbs in the center of his enemies. His people. When did they become his enemies? Zuko's feet softly hit the ground, and he rose with his swords ready. He pointed one blade at the door, an obvious exit, but any attempt at subtlety was long past. A voice overlooking the battleground called out news of the Avatar's escape. Zuko's heart went cold. He nearly turned in response. He knew that voice. Zhao, a minor noble whose family's money had brought him a fancy naval position and whose ruthlessness and aggression had maintained it. The man was ambitious in the worst way. What's more, he was favored in short-term solutions and did not care about the cost it took to achieve his goals. He was cruel. He had been at the Agni Kai. He'd smiled. Was this the person who was after Aang? If so, their caution, their hatred, was warranted. Zhao exemplified the worst traits of the Fire Nation, and held none of their best. Apparently, under his father's rule, that was enough to rise to admiral. He almost paused then and there, ready to face a man he remembered as a cruel bully, but Aang had ran past him as he slowed. "Follow me!" the younger boy cried. And Zuko brought his mind to the matter at hand. This was the important thing, not a 3-year-old personal rivalry. He had to prioritize rescuing Aang. Anything else could wait until he had more time to think things through. Well, if the opportunity presented itself to do something, he would take it, of course, but for the moment. The pair fought through the doors, Aang with bursts of air, Zuko with furiously flashing blades that fought weapons and bending alike. Unfortunately, the stronghold was staffed with a literal army, in which Aang had supernatural speed. Zuko's stamina was still lacking from his time in the cave. He found himself surrounded as Aang ran toward a closing door. Zuko grunted as his blades hit into spear after spear, mowing down the weapons of the mob who surrounded him. He did not cry out to his friend. He had started this. He would see it through. Aang would get out, regardless of what happened to him. That was what he had came here to do. If Aang got out, then he was successful, regardless of whatever happened to Zuko. The teen did feel a stab of bitterness as yet another person apparently deemed him undeserving of help. Suddenly, a burst of wind as powerful as a tornado sent the men in front of him flying. He jumped just as another blast sent the men behind him flying back as well. With yet another blast of air, Zuko found himself flying in the stronghold walls, barely biting back a yelp as he stumbled to his feet. Okay, he wasn't sure he liked that. No, he knew. He didn't like that. He did kind of want to do it again, though. Men surrounded once more, and he slashed with his blades. holding them off until Aang could airbend over the wall as well. The younger boy wrapped his legs around Zuko's waist and spun a staff? Where had he gotten that? Furiously above them, which somehow allowed them to hover in the air. Thanks, Zuko grunted as he slashed at the spears thrown their way. He was glad the Yu Yan hadn't made an appearance yet. If they did, this rescue would immediately become an arrest. Or an execution. We aren't out yet, Aang said with uncharacteristic grimness as his makeshift form of flying faltered and the pair stumbled into the secondary wall. Immediately they were besieged by more soldiers, and the pair fought side by side once more, one with bending, one with blades. Zuko was frantically trying to think of a plan B, when Aang ran past and handed him a pair of ladders, with the command to jump on his back. Zuko followed suit without thinking. He definitely didn't ever want to do the ladder thing ever again. It worked though, at least until a firebender caught wise enough to set the ladder on fire, mere seconds before they had cleared the final gate. The pair ended up sprawled on the floor at the final gate, impenetrable feet away from freedom. Firebenders surrounded them, attacking at one with their flames. Zuko moved into a useless blocking post, but Aang pushed him back and sent a protective wall of air around the pair of them before the blow could land. "Hold your fire!" a voice shouted, and Zuko looked over Aang's shoulder to see Zhao walking toward them. A lifelong petty dislike brought a bad taste to his mouth as the man approached. "The Avatar must be captured alive." Now Zuko had a lot of bad ideas this time. The decision to rescue the Avatar may have been one of them. Putting his blades to his potential ally, maybe friend's neck, was undoubtedly one of the worst. He'd acted without thinking, the man's command triggering in his subconscious before his mind even connected the dots. They wanted the Avatar alive. Maybe they wanted him alive more than they wanted him in their possession. That was the only chance they had. He was going to take it. Aang shot him a terrified look. Zu? He began to whisper, his voice far too quiet for any but Zuko to hear, but the prince cut it off in case. "Trust me, I'm not going to hurt you, I promise." The words were barely a breath, completely hidden by his mask so Zhao wouldn't even know that he spoke. After a moment, Aang gave an almost imperceptible nod as Zhao watched him with an ever-deepening scowl. After a stare down that seemed to last for hours, Zhao commanded, "Open the gate." Every word seemed to be torn from his lips, filled with reluctance and simmering hatred. One of his men questioned him, forcing the man to repeat his command, just as reluctant and angry. "Let them out! Now!" Slowly, the doors behind them began to open, and Zuko walked backwards, careful not to actually place his blades too close to the airbender's neck as he pulled Aang with him. Zuko's heart felt like it was pounding out of his chest as he pulled the boy behind him down the path leading away from the fort. "Hold on," he breathed. "Just a bit further and I think we're in the clear." "Okay." "Okay." The boy just said okay, as if it was easy to trust someone with swords held at their neck. As though it was that easy to trust Zuko. The boy saw a dark something in the air shooting toward them. Had the barest thought of, "Oh, there's the Yu Yan archers." Then there was a burst of pain before the world went dark. Zuko tried to meditate as the two water tribe teens choked on the frogs. He didn't see Aang get the frogs, but apparently the Avatar had dragged his unconscious form around half the forest after one of the archers had knocked him out. At least he had the presence of mind to grab the swords and mask. He never wanted to be weaponless again, and the mask would be necessary if he planned to continue. To continue being... to be a traitor? He had done it. There was no denying it. He was a traitor to the crown. But then, did a man such as Ozai deserve a loyal son? No. But the people of the Fire Nation deserved a loyal prince. And he would be one. He just had to figure out what that meant. He looked at the child who had willingly risked his freedom and safety many times over to get his friends the frogs. The boy who had come back for him when freedom was in his grasp. At least it seemed like he was a good teacher. Though, that could have been the concussion talking.